I've worked around the dead for 12 years, long enough to know that silence is the only honest thing left in a body. I didn't always fear the dead. In fact, I once thought working with them was the only place in this world where I could still breathe. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Hannah in a car accident. A drunk teenager crossed the median and hit her head-on. She died before the ambulance even arrived. One moment she was laughing at something I'd said, and the next, I was identifying her body under fluorescent lights that buzzed like flies. The funeral home tried to talk me out of seeing her one last time. They said the damage was too severe. But I insisted. I needed to see her. To believe she was really gone. And when they finally wheeled her in, when I saw what was left of the woman I loved more than anything, something inside me snapped in a way that never healed. I couldn't save her. I couldn't even give her a gentle goodbye. So I buried myself in this work. The crematorium. The quiet. The stillness. The dead don't judge. They don't leave. They don't take pieces of you the way the living can. But on the night Hannah died, and I've never told anyone this, I heard something when they closed the retort door. A whisper. Soft. Broken. Marcus? I told myself it was grief. So, my mind collapsing under the weight of losing her. But sometimes, even years later, when the furnace doors hiss shut at the end of a shift, I still hear it. Her voice. Calling me from the other side. No matter how violent their ending was, once they reach my table, everything is still. Predictable. Safe. But on the night that changed everything, I learned silence can lie. It was close to midnight, rain hammering against the metal roof of the Oak Ridge crematorium like a warning I didn't understand. I was alone on the night shift, like I always was, half finished with paperwork when the lights flickered once, then again as if the building inhaled sharply. I'd felt strange nights before. I'd heard pipes groan, vents whistle, machines settle. You spend enough time around death, your mind plays tricks. But this wasn't that. This was different in a way I could feel behind my ribs. The first sign came as a smell. Not the usual chemical sharpness of disinfectant or the faint sweetness of formaldehyde. The smell was warm, smoky, burnt. And the cremation furnace wasn't even on. That was when I heard it. The sound that split my life neatly into before and after. A whisper. Soft. Dry. Close. Like someone's mouth was hovering inches from my ear. Don't close it. I froze. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Every hair on my arm stood up at once. I turned, expecting to catch someone behind me, maybe a coworker messing around or a lost visitor. But the room was empty. Absolutely, impossibly empty. I tried to convince myself it was the wind leaking through the vents. Or maybe I'd imagined it. But then it came again, this time clearer, steadier, almost pleading. They're still here. The words drifted from the direction of the furnace. I hadn't opened it that night. No one had. The steel door was shut, the temperature gauge sitting at 0, the control panel dark. Yet the whisper came from inside. I stood there, staring at the furnace door, my pulse pounding so loudly it nearly drowned out everything else, until another sound slipped through. 3 sharp knocks. Knock, knock, knock. From the other side of the metal. That was the moment I knew the dead weren't as quiet as I'd always believed. And that someone, or something, inside that furnace needed me to hear them. The knock from inside the furnace still echoed in my skull when the buzzer at the loading bay suddenly rang. A harsh metallic screech that snapped me back to the living world. Midnight deliveries were rare. Unannounced deliveries were non-existent. I wiped my palms on my scrubs and walked toward the bay, feeling each step like it was dragging a shadow behind it. Rain pounded the concrete outside, cascading off the roof in heavy sheets. Headlights washed through the narrow window and a white van idled by the door. No markings, no funeral home logo, nothing. When I opened the loading door, a man stood there in a soaked gray jacket, hood low over his face. He didn't introduce himself. Didn't smile. His eyes barely met mine. "I've got a body for you," he said, voice flat, almost rehearsed. That alone wasn't strange. The next part was. No paperwork. Just, take care of it tonight. He shoved the gurney forward before I could respond. The body was wrapped tight in a black mortuary bag. Cheap plastic, not the heavier grade bags used by hospitals. Raindrops slid off it like oil. "Hold on," I said. "No tag? No ID? Who signed off on?" But the man was already backing away, hands raised like he wanted no part of this conversation. "It needs to be done before sunrise," he muttered. "Manager knows." I didn't keep my eyes off him until the van's taillights disappeared into the dark. Only then did my attention shift to the bag on the gurney. Looked wrong. The outline underneath wasn't relaxed like most bodies. This one felt stiff, coiled, almost defensive. And the zipper was drawn all the way to the top, pulled so violently tight that the plastic puckered. My gut twisted. Something about this was off. Very off. I wheeled the gurney inside, the wheels squeaking across the slick floor. The storm outside was so loud it felt like the world was trying to drown out whatever I was about to see. In the prep room, under the cold fluorescent lights, I finally unzipped the bag. The first thing I noticed were the wrists. Purple bruises ringed them, perfect circles like restraints had been there for days. Cuts along the forearms suggested someone had fought desperately against whatever held them. But the face told the real story. A young man, early 20s, thin. Dirt was caked beneath his fingernails. A gash ran along his hairline, shallow but fresh. His eyes were half open, fixed in a frozen terror that made my stomach tighten. And then I saw the mark. On the left side of his chest, a symbol carved into the skin, small, deliberate, like someone wanted it found. A circle with 4 slashes through it. I'd never seen anything like it in any coroner's report or police file. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the room for a split second. And in that flash, I swore the young man's jaw twitched. I leaned closer, breath held. Nothing. No movement. No pulse. Just the storm playing tricks on me again. But when I turned to grab gloves, something fell from the body and hit the table with a soft tap. A piece of paper. Crumpled, damp, shoved so deep between his teeth that it must have been placed there minutes, or hours, before he died. I unfolded it with shaking hands. 6 characters. Scrawled in a frantic, almost childlike handwriting. OM04. I didn't know what it meant. But the furnace whisper suddenly made a sick kind of sense. Someone didn't want this man identified. Someone didn't want him remembered. Someone wanted him burned before sunrise. And I'd just become the last person standing between him and a secret someone killed to protect. I stood over the young man's body longer than I should have, the slip of paper still trembling between my fingers. OM04. The handwriting looked rushed, frantic, like it was scratched down while someone was running for their life. But the more I stared, the more one truth settled deep in my gut. Whatever happened to him, he didn't go quietly. I set the paper aside and reached for a fresh pair of gloves. The storm outside had grown violent, slamming rain against the windows hard enough to rattle the metal frames. A low rumble of thunder rolled beneath the building, and for a moment, I let myself believe the unease inside me came from the weather, not the corpse on the table. But then the power flickered. Once. Twice. Long enough for every shadow in the room to stretch and breathe. "Come on," I muttered, shaking the light switch as if that would fix the wiring. It didn't. When the light stabilized again, something was wrong. The body had shifted. It wasn't much, just a subtle roll of the shoulder, a slight change in how the head angled, but it was enough. Enough to make my pulse spike. Enough to make the air in the room feel suddenly thin. I stepped closer, heart hammering. "Okay. Don't do this," I whispered to the corpse, even though it made no sense to say it out loud. But instinct took over. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Checked again. Still nothing. Your mind is messing with you, Marcus. That's what I told myself. But when I reached for the overhead lamp, I froze. His fingers had moved. 2 of them, just slightly, curled inward as though he were trying to form a fist. My mouth went dry. This wasn't post-mortem twitching. I'd seen plenty of those. This was deliberate, controlled, intentional. I backed away so fast I nearly knocked over the tray of tools behind me. Then the temperature in the room dropped. Not like a draft. Not like the AC kicked in. It was a sudden, biting cold that cut straight through my scrubs and settled in my bones. I turned toward the thermostat. The numbers blinked rapidly, glitching like someone was messing with the panel, until the screen went black. A soft, metallic scrape echoed behind me. I spun around. The gurney had shifted a full inch toward the furnace door. My breath hitched. I hadn't touched it. The floor was level. The wheels were locked. There was no logical reason it should have moved. Another scrape. Another inch. The gurney inching forward like it was being pulled. "No," I whispered, voice shaking. "No, no, no." But the room answered with a sound I knew too well. A sound no imagination could create. Knock, knock, knock. 3 identical taps from the furnace. The same rhythm I'd heard an hour earlier. This time, though, something new followed. A low exhale. A breath. "Don't let them burn me." I stumbled back until my spine hit the wall. The words weren't coming from the room. They weren't coming from the corpse. They were coming from inside the furnace. My eyes darted to the young man's face. His lips were slightly parted, frozen in that same expression of terror. Another whisper drifted out, quieter, trembling, like someone trapped somewhere no living person should be. "They're coming back." Lightning flashed, filling the room with a blinding white. And in that split second of illumination I saw it. A shadow behind me. Tall. Still. Watching. But when the lights flickered back to normal, the shadow was gone. Only the corpse remained, and the furnace door now cracked open just half an inch, like someone had pushed it from the inside. The furnace door should not have been open. Not even a sliver. Those doors weighed over 100 pounds and sealed airtight. They didn't crack open. They didn't shift. They only moved when a living person opened them. But there it was, open just enough for darkness to spill out like ink across the floor. I stared at it, frozen. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were inching closer. The cold deepened, tightening around my lungs. My breath came out in white puffs. The storm outside roared louder, yet every sound inside the crematorium seemed muffled, swallowed. And then, the whisper returned. Not soft this time. Not subtle. Close. Clear. Unmistakably human. "Don't close it, please." The voice drifted from the throat of the furnace, carried on a shaky breath that didn't sound dead at all. It was the kind of voice you heard from someone trapped, someone begging from a dark place they couldn't escape. My hands trembled so badly I had to grip the counter to steady myself. "Who's there?" I whispered before I could stop myself. A stupid question. A terrifying question. But the furnace answered anyway. "Let me out." It wasn't the young man's voice. His lips hadn't moved. His face still frozen in that mask of fear. This voice was older. Broken. Desperate. I took a single step closer, though every instinct screamed at me not to. As I approached, the heat gauge on the wall flickered. The needle crept upward, slow at first, then jerked violently as if something inside the furnace was pushing against the temperature sensors. Except the furnace wasn't on. The ignition was off. Everything was off. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "If someone's trapped." The whisper cut me off, sharp and warning. "They're watching." I froze. My eyes darted around the room. Empty. Cold. Silent. Except for the faint hum of the emergency lights struggling against the storm. "They," I whispered. "Don't trust the man who brought him." The voice trembled. "Don't trust anyone." A chill shot down my spine. My mind flashed back to the hooded driver, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he shoved the body inside like he couldn't get rid of it fast enough, and the way he didn't ask for a signature. Didn't fill out forms. Didn't follow protocol. Before I could process that, the furnace door groaned. Slowly. Painfully. It opened another inch. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The darkness beyond the door seemed to pulse like a living thing. Then came a third whisper, this one so close it raised the hair on the back of my neck. He wasn't the only one. Something shifted inside the furnace. The shadows moved. I blinked and for an instant I saw it. A hand. Thin. Pale. Fingers curled and reaching outward. I gasped, nearly tripping over the gurney. The young man's body jerked again, his arm twitching toward the furnace as though responding to the hand inside. "No," I breathed. No, this isn't real." But reality didn't care whether I believed it or not. A sound rose from the furnace, not a whisper this time, but a low, guttural moan that vibrated through the metal walls. The kind of sound made by someone who had screamed too long and too hard. The temperature gauge spiked again, slamming into the red zone, even though the furnace remained dark. Then with a violent clang the door snapped shut. The entire room shook. The lights flickered wildly. The tools on the counter clattered to the floor. For a moment the world felt like it tilted sideways. And then, silence. Not peaceful silence. Not the sterile stillness I'd known for years. The silence was wrong. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, as if something in the room is holding its breath, waiting. I backed away from the furnace, chest tight. When I reached the gurney I realized something that made my knees buckle. The young man's head had turned. No longer angled toward the ceiling. Now he was facing the furnace. Eyes wide open. Staring straight at it. And on his lips, still cold, still unmoving, rested the faintest trace of a whisper that didn't come from his lungs but from somewhere deeper, somewhere ancient. "Don't let them burn me." That was when the overhead speaker system crackled to life, even though it hadn't worked in years. A distorted voice whispered through the static. "Marcus, they're coming?" The speaker fell silent, leaving a thin trail of static that curled around my thoughts like smoke. I stood in the center of the prep room, breathing too fast, every instinct screaming at me to run. But another instinct, stronger, heavier, held me in place. The furnace had whispered my name. Whoever, or whatever, was inside that furnace knew me. And somehow I knew, the only answers I'd get were hidden in the body lying on my table. I forced myself to turn back to him. The young man's head remained tilted toward the furnace, eyes wide open, pupils glassy but unervingly focused. I'd never seen a corpse look like it was listening. For a long, suspended second, I wondered if I should cover his face. It felt wrong to leave him exposed like that, staring at something neither of us understood. But something deep inside me whispered, "Look closer. You missed something." I swallowed hard and reached for the overhead lamp. The warm light washed over the young man's body, revealing details I hadn't caught when the room was dark and chaotic. His wrist. I'd noticed the bruising before, but now I saw the pattern. The bruises weren't random. They formed a tight band around the joint, almost symmetrical. Restraints. Metal ones from the shape. I'd seen similar marks on trafficking victims during my short internship with the coroner's office years ago. My stomach tightened. But that wasn't all. Running along the inside of each arm were thin, shallow cuts. Not deep enough to bleed out. Not torture. Tracking marks, like someone had drawn lines on him. For measurements. For placement. As if he had been prepared, like inventory. I reached for his hand next. Rigor had passed, leaving the fingers pliable, but the fingernails were packed with clotted dirt. Dark brown. Grainy. Not Iowa soil. Iowa dirt is soft, black, rich. This was sand, coarse, rocky. I rubbed some between my fingers. Desert sand. But the nearest desert was hundreds of miles away. "Where did they take you?" I whispered to him, knowing I'd get no answer. Still, I checked every inch of him, driven by a creeping certainty that someone wanted this body to disappear without a trace. Beneath his shirt, along his ribcage, I found more carvings, small lines etched into skin, forming shapes I couldn't read at first. But when I stepped back, the pattern emerged. 4 circles. 4 slashes. A triangle underneath. A symbol. A brand. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a random killing. This was organized. Planned. Ritualistic even, but not religious. More like coded communication. I moved to examine his neck, and that's when I saw it. Faint bruising beneath the jawline, angled upward, not around the throat but behind it. Choking marks from someone pulling backward with an object. Rope or thin wire. A ligature homicide. And then, the worst detail of all. Behind his left ear, hidden under matted hair, was a small incision. Clean. Professional. Surgical even. I pried it open with my gloved fingers and found a deeper cavity. A microchip-sized pocket. But it was empty. Someone had removed whatever was there, either right before he died or right after. Suddenly the young man didn't seem like a victim of random violence. He seemed like someone who'd been carrying something important. Something worth killing for. I stepped back, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it all. But the room didn't give me time. A sharp clatter broke the silence. I looked down. The toe tag, though he'd never had one, had fallen from the table. Except it wasn't a toe tag. It was the crumpled paper I had pulled from his mouth. OM04. It had moved. I hadn't touched it. I crouched and picked it up again. The corner of the paper was wetter than before, as if someone had been holding it in their mouth more recently than when I found it. Lightning flashed, and in the blast of white light bouncing off the steel counters, I saw something that made my knees weaken. The young man's mouth was slightly open again, wider than before, like he had spoken. Adrenaline surged through me, but before I could react, the furnace made a noise I had never heard in my 12 years here. A long metallic creak, as if straining under the weight of something inside trying to push outward. And then a female voice, sharp, breathless, whispered from the furnace. He ran. They caught him. They'll come for you too. My heart seized. I stumbled backward, slamming into the counter. Who are you? I yelled, though my voice cracked halfway through. The furnace answered with a whisper that made my blood run ice cold. We were all OM04. I stared at the young man on the table, his eyes reflective under the lamp, his head still turned toward the furnace. Somewhere deep behind those steel doors, there wasn't just one voice. There were many. And they wanted me to hear every single one. For several long seconds I couldn't move. The prep room felt like a vacuum chamber, airless, soundless, as if the building itself was waiting for my reaction. We were all OM04. The furnace whispered it like a collective confession. A message from more than one voice. More than one soul. And suddenly, the crematorium didn't feel like the place I'd worked in for 12 steady years. It felt like a burial ground layered with secrets I'd never noticed. My hands shook as I backed out of the prep room, leaving the young man under the cold light. I needed answers, real human answers. Ones that didn't come from a voice trapped behind a steel door. The office was dark except for the emergency light flickering in the corner. I opened the old filing cabinet where we kept years of records, though half of them were dusty relics no one touched anymore. I pulled the past 6 months of cremation logs. Immediately my stomach tightened. Rows of entries marked with red pen. Cause of death, unknown. Next of kin, none. Delivery by, pending. Identification, not provided. And the sign and signatures were always the same shape, just an illegible scrawl, never a real name. I counted 16 of them. 16 bodies with no records, no families, and now, apparently, no peace. The furnace whispered again in my memory, we were all OM04. 16 unclaimed bodies. 16 missing persons no one connected. 16 times someone bypassed every legal requirement and trusted us to make them disappear. I didn't want to believe Oak Ridge Crematorium was involved. This place was supposed to honor the dead, not erase them. But I remembered something else, something I hadn't thought about in years. My old supervisor, Raymond. A quiet, tired man who always looked like he carried twice the weight he deserved. One night, during a routine shift, he'd said something that felt like a joke at the time. If you ever see a body come in with no name, don't ask questions. Just do your job. I'd laughed then. Now it made my skin crawl. I sat at the computer and accessed the digital archives. The folder for unidentified cases had been locked for years, but the password hadn't changed. Oak Ridge 1957. The files opened instantly. And what stared back at me was a nightmare carved into spreadsheets. Each anonymous cremation had a timestamp. Each timestamp matched the driver who delivered tonight's body. Same van. Same unregistered plate. Same request every time. Cremate before sunrise. No questions. No files. No remains returned. It was a pattern. A pipeline. A disposal system. Outside, thunder cracked so loud the windows shook. I grabbed my jacket, heart pounding, and ran to the back storage room. There was something I needed to see, something I'd avoided since the day I was hired. The old paper archives from before the crematorium digitized records. Dust exploded into the air as I pulled down the box labeled 1974 to 1986. And there they were. Familiar red markings. Similar cases. Bodies with no names. Deliveries made after midnight. Notes written in hurried handwriting. Direct transfer. No ID. Burn immediately. OM, unverified. The same letters from the note inside the dead man's mouth. My hands trembled as I grabbed the next folder. More bodies. More missing people. More red ink. And then something else. Photocopies of old police reports. Complaints filed about disappearances. Women, men, teenagers, all from vulnerable communities. Immigrants. Runaways. People who could vanish without triggering alarms. One statement caught my eye. Last seen entering a white van behind Oak Ridge Crematorium. The driver claimed to be a funeral transport worker. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. Another file showed a photo of the same van I saw tonight, at least the same model, same color, same blank side panels. Then I found the page that pulled all the oxygen out of the room. A memo from a former crematorium manager dated 1981. Per arrangement with OM, all unidentified cases to be processed off record. Staff should not investigate missing documentation. Payment will be received in cash deliveries. Arrangements with OM. OM wasn't a person. It was an operation. A system. A machine built to erase people. My chest tightened as I returned to the more recent records. Every single unidentified body had OM scribbled in the margin. Sometimes alone. Sometimes followed by 2 digits. OM02, OM11, OM04. The pattern hit me like a punch. These weren't identifiers for people. They were routes, shipments, sequence numbers. And the young man in my prep room? He hadn't been the first OM04. He was the latest. A violent bang echoed from the prep room. Not a whisper. Not a knock. A full force slam. I sprinted back, breath ragged, terror crawling up my spine. When I reached the doorway, the furnace door was wide open. What? The heat gauge spiked. The emergency light flickered. And the young man's body was gone from the table. The air trembled with a whisper that sounded like dozens of voices speaking at once. Now you know. They're coming back. You can't let them in. My entire body went cold. Someone was manipulating the crematorium. Someone knew I understood too much. And whoever they were, the voices were right. They were coming. The prep room was empty. Not the kind of empty you expect at midnight in a crematorium. This was a hollow, violated emptiness. The gurney sat abandoned beneath the overhead lamp, its white sheet hanging limp. The young man's body, gone. Vanished. Not dragged. Not dropped. Just gone. My throat tightened. No, this isn't happening. But the open furnace door stared back at me like a mouth ready to swallow whoever stepped too close. The red-hot temperature gauge thrashed erratically, needles slamming from low to high as if something inside the furnace breathed against the sensors. Sparks flickered in the darkness beyond the door even though the burners were cold. Something had stepped out. I stepped back into the hallway, heart racing, sweat slicking my palms despite the freezing air. The lights above me dimmed one by one, cascading down the hall like an unseen hand was sliding a finger across the switches. And then the worst thing happened. The cameras turned on. By themselves. The main monitor crackled to life inside the security room before I even touched it. Lines of static blurred, shifted, then sharpened into a grainy feed from the hallway I stood in. I blinked at the screen. On the monitor. I wasn't alone. A second figure stood behind me. Tall. Blacker than the shadows around it. Its outline wrong, like a person made of absence instead of flesh. I spun around. Nothing. Just the humming lights and the long, sterile hallway. But on the screen the shadow remained. Its head tilted in my direction. Watching me. Mirroring every breath I took. I felt something crawling across my skin, a prickling awareness that someone, or something, had stepped just outside the limits of what I could see. I whispered, terrified of the answer, "What do you want from me?" The screen glitched. Froze. Then zoomed, glitched again, focusing on the empty hallway behind me. The shadow moved. Not on the feed. Behind me. Slow. Deliberate. Like it was choosing whether to reveal itself. I lunged into the security room, slamming the door shut and locking it. My pulse thrashed against my ribs. My breathing turned ragged. I dragged a metal chair in front of the door even though I knew it wouldn't matter if that thing wanted in. The monitors flickered again. Every camera inside the crematorium switched on simultaneously. The furnace room, the loading bay, the lobby, the supply closet, the long hallway I just escaped. One by one, the screens illuminated the same impossible figure, the shadow following me through each room, always at a distance of about 15 feet, never closer, never farther, like it was waiting. Then the hallway camera feed zoomed on its own, tightened on a corner of the frame. I squinted at the pixelated image. Something else was there. A handprint, smudged across the wall. Not human-sized. Smaller. Thin fingers etched in what looked like soot or old ash. I'd seen marks like that on the inside of cremation trays after processing human remains. But these weren't inside the furnace. They were on the hallway wall next to the camera. Another feed zoomed. Another handprint. Then another. Then dozens. Clawing the walls, reaching toward the furnace room, reaching toward me. My chest tightened. Oh God. A soft tapping came from the hallway. I froze. Tap, tap, tap. Not the furnace knocking this time. This was footsteps. Soft. Bare. Dragging lightly across the tiles. Something walked past the security room door. The shadow on the camera paused, then turned its head toward me like it could sense my fear through the walls. Suddenly, the overhead speaker crackled again. Static spilled through the room, followed by a voice I recognized instantly, the same voice that whispered we were all OM04. He's here. The one who brings us. Don't let him inside. I looked at the loading bay feed. Headlights. A white van rolling up slowly, headlights carving through the rain. The same van that had delivered the young man. The driver stepped out. Tonight he didn't bother with the hood. I saw his face clearly for the first time, thin, angular, hollow eyes that looked like they'd seen too many dead people and didn't care to see fewer. He walked toward the back door with a confidence that chilled my blood. The shadow on the monitors vanished instantly. As if it feared him. As if it stepped away. The voices whispered harshly through the speaker. Don't open the door. But the driver didn't knock. He knew the code. The keypad beeped. 4 short beeps, 1 long. The same pattern used by staff. My staff code. The lock clicked. And then a voice I'd never heard from a living throat rasped right behind my ear, cold, urgent, unmistakably close. Marcus, run. I spun. And saw it. The shadow. Standing inches behind me now. Not moving. Not blinking. Not breathing. But pointing. Pointing toward the emergency exit. Because the driver was already inside. And the crematorium was no longer mine. The shadow's arm stayed extended, finger pointing toward the emergency exit like a silent command. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, legs moving, lungs burning, adrenaline pushing me toward the far end of the security room. But I didn't make it far. Footsteps echoed from the hallway beyond the door. Steady, measured, almost casual, like someone out for a walk, not someone hunting. The driver. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. He knew I was still inside. He knew I had nowhere to go. The keypad outside the security room beeped again, 4 short, 1 long. My code. His key. I backed against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. The shadow slid to the corner of the room, dissolving into the darkness as if it feared the man on the other side of that lock. The driver's voice seeped through the door, low, steady, terrifyingly calm. Marcus, we need to talk. His hand pressed against the glass window of the door. Bene. Still wet from the rain. I know you're in there. And I know you've seen things tonight you weren't supposed to see. Every syllable slithered under my skin. I forced myself to speak. Where's the body? That's what you want to know. He chuckled, quiet, humorless. After everything you've heard tonight? I swallowed hard. What did you do to him? Nothing he didn't already do to himself, the driver replied. He ran. He talked. He broke the rules. OM has no tolerance for loose ends. My blood chilled. OM, what is that? Who are you working for? Silence. Then. You're asking the wrong questions. His tone sharpened. The right question is, why did he choose your furnace? My heart dropped. Choose my furnace? The driver leaned closer to the window. His eyes met mine through the glass, cold, empty, as if he'd long ago decided emotions were a weakness. They all came here, Marcus. Not because we brought them, but because something inside your crematorium called to them. He paused, pressing his forehead lightly to the glass. And now it's calling you. A chill shot down my spine. You're insane. Am I? He hissed. Or are you finally seeing the truth that's been staring at you for years? He reached for the lock. The shadow in the corner recoiled violently, shrinking back as if burned. My instinct screamed to run. But I didn't get the chance. The lock clicked. The door swung open an inch. Then two. I grabbed the nearest object, a metal clipboard, and held it like a shield, though it would have offered the same protection as paper in a gunfight. The driver stepped inside. Rain dripped from his coat, forming dark spots on the tile. He shut the door behind him with a heavy click and turned the lock. You looked through the records, he said softly. I warned Raymond years ago someone curious would eventually stumble across the red files. My stomach twisted at the mention of my old supervisor. He didn't listen, the driver continued. So he had to be retired. You killed him? I freed him, the driver corrected with a calmness that made bile rise in my throat. He served OM the way we all do. I held my ground. I'm not part of this. You are now. He stepped closer. The moment you opened that boy's mouth and read the note, you became part of it. He reached into his coat. I flinched, raising the clipboard. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone. On the screen was footage from the crematorium cameras. Not the live feed. Past recordings. And in each clip, every clip, the same shadow stood behind me, following me from room to room long before tonight. You think this place is innocent? The driver asked. You think the dead whisper because someone hurt them? He leaned close, his breath cold against my face. They whisper because they chose you. My knees nearly buckled. They want you, he continued. OM wants you. And I'm here to collect. Before he could reach for me, a noise erupted from the hallway. A heavy slam, followed by dragging footsteps. Then a deep, echoing groan. The driver's expression shifted, fear flickering in his eyes for the first time. No, he whispered. Not now. Not tonight. I blinked. What is that? He backed toward the door. They weren't supposed to move yet. He didn't answer. The hallway lights outside the security room flickered violently. Something scraped against the floor, slow, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across tile. Then the furnace room camera switched on. The young man's body stood in the doorway. Standing. Not breathing. Not alive. His head turned toward the security room, toward the camera, toward us. The furnace gauge spiked so hard the metal groaned. And then the voices rose again, dozens layered over one another like a single roaring whisper. You shouldn't have come back. The driver backed into the corner, pale and trembling. For the first time he wasn't in control. Something else was. The shadow stepped out of the corner of the security room, solidifying, rising behind him like a tall, black silhouette. The driver turned just as the shadow reached for him. And the lights went out. When the lights went out, the darkness didn't feel natural. It felt inhabited, electric, heavy, as if the air itself thickened with every breath. The driver's scream sliced through the blackness, a raw, terrified sound followed by a violent thud. I stumbled backward, groping blindly until my hand hit the metal rack behind me. Tools rattled. Something glass shattered at my feet. Then the shadow moved. I couldn't see it fully, but I felt it shift, a colder pocket of darkness sliding across the room, pulling the light out of every corner it touched. The driver gasped, choked, then whimpered like a child. Stay away, he wheezed. I did what you asked, I delivered them, I did everything. The whispering rose around us, not from one direction but from all of them. A chorus of voices, layered and uneven, old and young, male and female. Some cried. Some begged. Some shrieked. But all of them spoke the same terrible truth. You took us. You burned us. Now it's your turn. The emergency lights flickered once, just enough to illuminate the scene for a single horrifying frame. The driver had been pinned to the wall. Not by hands. By shadows, long, impossibly thin tendrils of darkness wrapped around his wrists, chest, and throat like tar-covered ropes. His feet dangled above the floor. His eyes bulged. His face drained of color. Then darkness swallowed the room again. "Marcus," he choked, voice strangled and shaking. "Help me please, help." My instinct told me to run. My conscience told me to move. But both froze under the crushing weight of those whispers swirling through the dark. The dead weren't asking for help. They weren't seeking justice. They were taking their revenge. Another emergency light flickered, this time at the far end of the hallway outside the security room. The young man, the one who had arrived on the gurney just hours ago, stood beneath it. His head hung limply to one side. His arms dangled, but his feet were planted firmly on the ground. His shadow stretched unnaturally long behind him, reaching toward the furnace room as though calling the others to rise. The whispers sharpened. He took us. He delivered us. He watched us burn. The driver cried out again, a wet, choking sob. His sneakers kicked weakly against the wall. Something cracked, bone or tile, I couldn't tell. I forced myself to move even if every nerve screamed otherwise. My hands searched for the flashlight in the drawer beside me. When I flicked it on, the beam cut through the dark in a narrow cone of pale light. I aimed it at the driver. He was still pinned, now higher, his back arched unnaturally, shadows coiling tighter around him. His coat tore open like paper. Black fingerprints, ash-colored smudges, stained his skin. "Stop," I said quietly, though I didn't know who I was talking to. "Please, stop." The voices responded, rising like a storm. He fed us to the fire. He made us disappear. He sent others. He will never touch another. The shadows tightened around his throat. The driver's face turned purple. His tongue bulged between his teeth. His eyes rolled back. I turned the flashlight beam toward the young man in the hall. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, but his mouth moved, just barely, forming two words. Help us. Not revenge. Not wrath. Desperation. They weren't just punishing the driver, they were begging for release from something much older, much darker, something I still didn't fully understand. But the driver, whatever his role had been, was first. The lights flickered again. The furnace gauge roared to life across the building. I could hear it from here, metal expanding, fire awakening, the roar of flames hungry and alive. The dead were delivering him to the same end he had given them. A final whisper drifted across the room, soft, cold, absolute. Burn what he built. The flashlight trembled in my hand as the shadows yanked the driver backward, through the door, down the hallway, dragging him toward the furnace room. His screams echoed through the metal corridors. Then, a thunderous slam. The furnace door choking shut. The gauge spiking red. The screams stopped. Only the crackle of flames remained. The dead had taken their revenge. But the voices weren't done. As the hallway filled with a low, rumbling moan, the young man's corpse turned its head toward me once more. Now finish it. The furnace roared like a living beast behind the closed steel door, its flames devouring whatever the dead had dragged inside. I stood in the hallway, frozen, listening to the last echoes of the driver's screams dissolve into the crackle of fire. The air felt scorched and icy at the same time, as if I were standing at the crossroads of two worlds. The young man's corpse, if I could still call it that, remained upright in the center of the hallway. His head slowly lifted, eyes glossy but not empty. Not anymore. They carried something, an awareness, a plea, a warning. His lips parted with effort, the faintest tremor rippling through them. Finish it. The very last thing I wanted to do was go near that furnace. But some part of me, some instinct deeper than fear, understood what he meant. The dead weren't just seeking revenge. They were seeking closure. They wanted the operation that consumed them, the OM pipeline, the hidden network using our crematorium as its burial ground, to finally be exposed. And I was the only living witness left. My hands shook as I backed away from the furnace room, moving toward the lobby. Every light in the crematorium flickered violently, then died. Shadows stretched across the floor like spilled ink, retreating only when the faint blue glow of the exit sign pulsed overhead. I reached for the phone on the wall, and stopped. Would anyone believe me? Would anyone believe a story about whispers from the furnace? Shadows dragging a man to his death? Bodies rising? No. But they might believe the physical evidence. The files. The red-marked records. The old memos and police reports. Everything I'd found in the archives. I ran back to the office, yanked open the file drawers and stuffed everything into a box. Every document referencing unnamed bodies, every OM notation, every off-record cremation. The box was heavy, but my urgency made it weightless. A low groan echoed from the hallway. When I turned, the young man was gone. The corridor stood empty, except for a single trail of ash leading back toward the furnace room. They were leaving. The dead were finally leaving. I followed the ash down to the prep room. The furnace, now silent, sat sealed. No shadows spilled beneath it. No whispers crept through its seams. The air finally felt still. Empty. Finished. A single piece of paper lay on the floor. The same note I'd found in the young man's mouth. OM04. But now, a second line had been scratched beneath it in thin, shaky handwriting. Thank you. My throat tightened. My eyes stung. For the first time that night, I felt something warm push back against the terror. Relief. I walked out of Oak Ridge Crematorium at 5:42 a.m., just before sunrise. The sky was washed in pale colors. The storm had quieted. The world outside looked painfully normal, like none of the horrors inside had ever happened. But they had. And I carried the box to my car, knowing what I had to do. Police, reporters, federal investigators. Someone, anyone, who would listen. I didn't care if they called me crazy. I didn't care if they doubted every word. I had proof. And the dead deserved truth. Before I drove away, I looked back at the crematorium one last time. The building stood still, gray, harmless in the early light. For a moment, I wondered if I'd hallucinated everything. Then I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not from inside the furnace. From beneath my car. My breath caught in my lungs. A whisper followed, faint, drifting through the morning air like smoke. There are more. I started the engine with shaking hands. Whatever OM was, whatever they'd buried in that furnace beyond the 16 bodies I'd found, it wasn't over. The dead had trusted me with their voices. And now they weren't letting me walk away. Not until every last secret was brought into the light.